every single activist stride that has been made by the disability movement is on the chopping block. And you always need to know, when we're talking about disabled people's rights, all of those spaces are unequitable when it comes to race. So right now, for example, the DOJ just sent out a memo in which the holding of the Olmstead decision that found that it is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act to hold people, segregate them in institutions rather than their own homes within support care. This law that was held 27 years ago that is on the chopping block. The administration wants us dead or in these institutions to turn a profit on us. It is not shocking, but it is nonetheless terrifying. I encourage you to work with your state organizers. Also call your Fed representatives, but seriously, talk to people on a state level. Follow the resources. American Association of People with Disabilities, AAPD, and New Disabled South both provide excellent information to keep you up to date on how to fight back to this ever-growing movement of eugenics in the United States.
In 1990, they left their chairs at the bottom of these steps and they crawled. They forced the door open. The ADA passed and Section 504 shaped our future. They climbed so we could enter. And we are still climbing.
Picture behind me are patients from the Willowbrook State Hospital. This one was kind of different because it was geared towards children. And because of the atrocities that took place there, the Department of Mental Health redid everything. I mean, all the laws. Here are some of the survivors smiling. It was nice to see that they had come really far. Willowbrook was only supposed to hold about 4,000 children max. And it was really unethical for them to be at max capacity because these were special needs children. But at any given time, over 6,000 patients were there. A doctor decided to run hepatitis experiments on the children. He fed 60 children hepatitis virus. Yes, I said fed them. He watched their bellies swell, their eyes turn yellow with jaundice. The conditions were so shocking. This hospital was the catalyst for the civil rights of institutionalized persons in 1980. I would say thank goodness, but check out the children below.
Disabled children were starved here by the state. This was Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Pennsylvania. It housed children and adults with intellectual disabilities. Residents were beaten and physically restrained, and most of them were chronically underfed. They scavenged for food while living among rats, and overcrowding, filth, and neglect were documented in investigations. Many residents died from neglect. Pennhurst closed in 1987. Thousands passed through the institution, but the building is still standing.
What if one of the darkest medical experiments in American history wasn't performed on criminals, but on children who couldn't defend themselves? In the 1950s and 1960s, researchers at Willowbrook State School in New York deliberately exposed hundreds of children with intellectual disabilities to hepatitis. The goal, they said, was to study how the virus spread and eventually develop better treatments and vaccines. Many parents signed consent forms, but critics later argued that the consent wasn't truly informed. Willowbrook was severely overcrowded, and some families believed agreeing to the study was the only way their child could be admitted to the institution. When the experiments became public, they sparked nationwide outrage. The Willowbrook study became one of the most controversial chapters in American medical research and played a major role in creating stricter ethical rules to protect people participating in scientific studies. Drop a comment if you think history like this should never be forgotten. Follow The Dark Ledger for more hidden history.
Did you know there was a place in Pennsylvania where disabled people were tortured for almost 80 years? Pennhurst State School opened in 1908 as a care home, but it became a house of horrors. Thousands of disabled people were locked inside overcrowded rooms. Many were kept naked and tied to beds for years. Staff beat them daily and starved them as punishment. Doctors used patients like lab rats, giving them experimental drugs without permission. The abuse was so bad that patients ate their own waste to survive. Stronger residents were allowed to attack weaker ones while staff watched. People died from neglect and violence every single day. In 1968, NBC News cameras snuck inside. The footage shocked America. Patients covered in their own filth, showing broken bones and deep cuts from beatings. Some had been tied up so long they couldn't move anymore. Even after the expose, the torture continued for 20 more years. Pennhurst didn't close until 1987. The survivors who can still speak say they were treated worse than animals by the people meant to protect them.
The remains of over 900 patients were found unceremoniously stored in food jars in this mental asylum. This was Northern State Asylum in Sedro-Woodley, Washington, and it was originally designed to be a sort of utopian community for those that needed mental health treatment. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so I'm dedicating the next 30-ish days to bring you stories about people who were pushed to the margins of society because of their mental health. Just like the 900 patients that died in this asylum and were only remembered by their patient ID numbers. Northern State Asylum sounded like a good idea on paper, like let's build a nice new building to house people with mental health needs, and we'll attach a farm to it so that they can get outside and work and be productive, and this will give them a sense of purpose that will help their treatment be more effective. But no matter who says that or what year they say that in, it's a terrible, terrible idea. One of the most obvious reasons why this idea always fails is because to make a little separate society like this, you need massive amounts of resources, and state-funded programs almost never have enough resources. In 1921, a whistleblower stepped forward to report on the atrocious conditions of the food at Northern State Asylum. His name was Paul Stote, and he worked in the kitchen. According to his testimony, he was fired after refusing to serve rotten food to the patients, and he had already come forward once claiming that the asylum was not giving them enough food in the first place. In 1929, Northern State Hospital was accused of a process called redlining, which is where they would take certain patients, drive them to another state like Colorado, drop them off without any identifying information, and then continue to collect the money for that patient from the state of Washington. Because Northern State Hospital, like most state institutions, was chronically underfunded, when parts of the asylum started to break down, they just didn't fix them, like the crematorium. Unclear when the crematorium stopped working, but once it finally did go out, they just started storing the remains of inmates in food jars labeled only with their patient ID number and burying them in basically unmarked graves on the property. And in 1995, it was uncovered that during the 1950s, the U.S. Department of Energy conducted experiments on unknowing patients here at the asylum by injecting them with radioactive iron, specifically just to see what would happen. And that's why it's so important to remember these stories. Millions of people in the United States today are diagnosed with anxiety and depression, among other mental health conditions, and only 70 years ago, that might have landed you in a hospital being experimented on against your will by the government. In fact, popular author in his day, John Patridge, was put in Northern State Asylum because he was an eccentric, outspoken libertarian. Today, Northern State Asylum is abandoned and part of a state recreation area that you can go have a nice picnic at, if you want to.
In the 1960s, children born with severe disabilities like Down syndrome or hydrocephalus were often sent to large state-run institutions. Most were abandoned by their families, not out of cruelty, but because they were told nothing could be done. In these places, the children were examined, their conditions studied, but rarely understood. They were kept in wards, in silence, without stimulation or affection. Life was slow, routine, sometimes cold, and yet many smiled. Despite everything, some reached out for connection with a nurse or with each other. These images remind us that even in neglect, they remained deeply human.
They built it to heal people. Instead, it became one of the most terrifying places in American history. Central State Hospital in Indianapolis, Indiana, opened in 1848, designed for 250 patients. By the 1880s, they were cramming in over 5,000. People slept in hallways. Hundreds died every year from disease alone. But the overcrowding wasn't even the worst part. In the 1930s, doctors started performing ice pick lobotomies. They would hammer a metal pick through a patient's eye socket directly into their brain. No consent, no mercy, just compliance. Insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive treatments done over 100 times on a single patient. Patients left as shells of who they once were. And then there's the graves. Nearly 7,000 patients buried in unmarked plots right on the property, forgotten, unnamed, erased. When renovations began in the 1990s, workers started finding skeletal remains beneath their feet. The hospital finally closed in 1994, but people say it never really emptied. Ghost hunters have recorded voices in the tunnels, slamming doors in locked wards. A woman in white seen wandering the halls. Maybe they're still there because no one ever gave them justice. 7,000 people buried without names. Thousands more experimented on without consent. History called it treatment. You decide what it really was. Drop the word asylum in the comments if this gave you chills. Follow for more buried history they never taught you in school.
The Mississippi State Lunatic Asylum, located in Jackson, Mississippi, used between 1855 and 1935 for the mentally insane. It was discovered in 2012 that the existence of as many as 7,000 graves are located on the property where the University of Mississippi Medical Center now functions. It was discovered through historical record that a cemetery once existed at the location when the asylum was in operation. Patients who died at the institution who didn't have loved ones to claim their remains were buried in pine coffins with a wooden marker with a number. After the graves were discovered during a construction on campus, the construction was halted and a team was formed to give these folks a proper burial. This asylum closed more than 80 years ago, but it wasn't uncommon to bury the deceased patients together in unmarked graves. The bodies will continue to rest in peace at the university until the bodies can be exhumed through the proper channels.
You ever drive past an old building and you get the feeling that something inside is staring back at you? In New Albany, Indiana, there's a crumbling brick asylum sitting just off Grant Line Road, and a lot of locals say it should have been left buried in history. The Floyd County Asylum, also known as the Poor Farm. Back in 1838, Floyd County bought over 100 acres of land to house society's undesirable, the poor, the elderly, the mentally ill, unwed mothers, Civil War veterans, even children nobody wanted. And people were sent there not because they were dangerous, but basically because society didn't even know what to do with them. And once they arrived, many never left. Residents worked the fields surrounding the property in exchange for food and shelter. Overcrowding became so severe by the late 1800s that officials began describing the conditions as depressing and hopeless. The asylum functioned as a hospital, workhouse, jail, juvenile detention center, and even a mental institution all rolled into one. Imagine the energy trapped inside those walls. Now here's where our story takes a darker turn. On February 15th, 1916, a fire tore through the attic dormitory after a storm damaged one of the building's flues. Flames swallowed the upper floors while residents and patients were trapped inside. Official reports listed only 5 deaths, but later historical surveys suggest that those numbers were much higher. A lot of the bodies allegedly were never recovered. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, hundreds of forgotten souls are said to be buried on that property to this day. Nearby sits Potter's Field, a cemetery with only a few visible headstones, despite researchers estimating that more than 300 unmarked graves are resting beneath the earth. Some investigators believe that amputated limbs and medical waste are even buried there too, which was apparently common practice at the time. So basically, people are out here just walking their dogs on top of what is probably an unmarked mass grave. Yeah, absolutely not. Over the years, paranormal investigators have flooded the North Annex searching for answers, and according to them, something inside definitely answers back. Visitors have reported footsteps echoing through empty hallways, voices whispering from dark rooms, screams coming from the basement, shadow figures watching them from broken windows. Some claim that unseen forces have shoved them. Others say doors slammed shut all on their own. One group even reported objects being thrown across the room during an investigation, while radio equipment allegedly picked up voices answering questions in real time. In the basement, people call it the most oppressive part of the entire property. Investigators describe an immediate heaviness the moment they walk downstairs. Like the air itself changes. Some say they were scratched, touched, or suddenly overwhelmed with panic for no reason at all. But one of the creepiest legends surrounding the Floyd County Asylum are the stories of the hitchhiker spirits. Several visitors claim that after leaving the property, strange activity followed them home. Knocking in empty rooms, shadow figures standing at the end of their hallways, nightmares, and whispers like something from this asylum definitely followed them home. The last I heard, the building sits boarded up and abandoned, decaying while county officials argue over whether or not it should be preserved, sold off, or demolished entirely. But if the stories are true, tearing it down may not silence whatever still lingers there. Because places built on suffering don't always stay quiet. So what do you think, Spooky Besties? Is the Floyd County Asylum genuinely haunted? Or are these stories just the result of the tragic history soaked into its walls? And tell me, Spooky Besties, would you ever step foot inside? Don't ghost me, boo. Be sure to follow for more haunted Indiana legends. And don't forget to like, save, and share this video with your favorite Spooky Bestie.
They didn't institutionalize disabled children because they had no other choice. They did it because it paid well. From the 1940s to the 1990s, thousands of disabled children across the U.S. were placed in long-term state institutions, not because they needed constant medical care, but because the government paid per diagnosis. The right label, profound intellectual disability, severe behavioral disorder, or nonverbal autism, meant steady checks from Medicaid, Social Security, and state grants. The child? They became a billing code, a line item, a source of revenue. And once inside, they rarely came out. Families were often told it was the best option. But behind closed doors, the truth was uglier. Some kids were misdiagnosed entirely, while others were medicated into silence to maintain documentation. Most received no education, no therapy, and no rights. Why would they? Healing a child meant losing the money. Keeping them inside, quiet, invisible, and unimproved kept the system fed and wallets fat. And the more children packed into these underfunded wards, the more federal dollars rolled in. This wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate institutional captivity disguised as compassion, backed by paperwork and funded by your taxes. If profit dictated who got locked away, how many kids were taken, not because they needed help, but because they brought in money? Follow Buried Medicine if you believe children aren't cash flow.
About 25% of the funding for Letchworth Village comes from the federal government, and one of the requirements for continued eligibility is that there be 80 square feet of space per patient. Here they get only 35 square feet. In the
Well, I visited the state institutions for the mentally retarded, and I think particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit, and that the children live in filth. I think all of us are at fault, and I think it's just it's long overdue that something be done about it.
How long have you been at Willowbrook?
18 years.
How is it living on the ward that you live?
Disgrace.
The attendants are trying their best, but the staff is just too small to do anything more than just try and keep the place clean. When there's only one person to take care of 30 or 40, nothing good can possibly happen. No rehabilitation, no training, nothing. The attendants are as much the victim of the conditions here as the patients are.
Walked a couple of steps and I had to open a second door. I was directed down to the end of the hall. There was another steel door. At 19 years of age, I basically said to myself, what have I gotten myself into? Who is locked behind 3 steel doors? Pushed the door open, and when I walked in, on the other side of the door were 40 toddlers. And why in God's name were they locked behind 3 steel doors?
When I applied for my job, I was really never taken to any of the wards. They just accepted my application, and they told me when I would start. And then I went to Building 6, which was my building. And the building supervisor opened the door to the day room, and there was the chaos.
You have no idea what was inside, no idea.
Willowbrook has really shaped a lot of disability history, and that is why we're at where we are, because the expose on Willowbrook, it exposed inhumane situations. People were outraged, lawsuits, civil rights concerns. So we moved away from institutional settings and moved towards home-based community settings. And within that, as the years have gone on, families have been bridging the gap as caregivers, because caregivers just are not there. So when you talk about removing caregivers, you're removing these people's stability. You're removing the only people that have been there, that have cared, that have showed up, because caregivers get spit on, they get hit, they get their eyes gouged out. All of these things, they don't keep coming back. They don't. So when you're talking about removing these caregivers, we're talking about having to go backwards in history to institutional settings. We're still not going to have the caregivers like Willowbrook. They didn't have enough caregivers, and that was one of the reasons it was the way it was. So we are bridging from then to now. Caregivers, family caregivers are a must. We should be moving towards family caregivers. I provide 24/7 care for my child that I cannot get any help with because he is aggressive. I am saving the state and the federal government tons of money. Within that, I don't have a life, okay? I don't have a job. I don't have Social Security, and I won't have much of a pension. And I've given up everything to keep my child at home. This is not an easy thing that none of us parents do, or children do for their parents, or whatever you want to say. But it's humane, and we love our family members. So as a nation, we should really be looking at this, because going backwards is not an option. It's not.
My brother Fred is a survivor of the Willowbrook State School. It's an institution that was built for 1,500 and ended up housing 5,300. It became a dumping ground. It was a school in name only, and he got out when he was 20, so he spent 16 years there. Fred has strong emotional intelligence, but if you give him an IQ test, he comes off having neurological impairments. My brother is probably the reason why I do everything I do. The care for people with intellectual disabilities has changed immensely since the 50s, when Fred first went into the state school. When Mom died, I became Fred's guardian. He was 45, which means I was 49. It's when I became the guardian that I discovered that Fred had been forgotten. He was in a group home for 20 years, and we got him out of there. What we found from Freddie was an artist. With assistance, he would write poetry. There were many, many talents there. He had learned that he can dictate his future. His poetry is presented at the New York City Poetry Festival on Governor's Island in the early 2000s. I think the biggest lesson that I got is that all people can learn, and they just learn in different ways. I chose to create this course that puts people with and without disabilities in the same classroom to start thinking differently. Because a lot of the folks may not speak clearly or are not verbal. The students learn how to communicate in a different way. And what I'm stressing is that living differently is natural, and that doing everything with 2 arms and 2 legs and speaking a certain way is not particularly the only way. That's considered ableism. If we accommodate, everybody can get on with their life. What my students walk away with is that it's okay to be different. Accepting difference, diversity, That's the secret for success. My name's Alan Goldstein, and this is my brief but spectacular take on everybody can learn.
Say bye, Fred.
Bye.
Did you know that children with disabilities were once intentionally exposed to hepatitis in an American institution? The place was Willowbrook State School on Staten Island. It was supposed to care for children with intellectual disabilities. But by the 1950s and 1960s, Willowbrook had become overcrowded, understaffed, and horrifyingly neglected. Children lived in filthy wards. Some were left unclothed. Others were crowded into rooms with almost no privacy, stimulation, or proper care. Then came the experiments. Because hepatitis was spreading through the institution, researchers began studying the disease by intentionally infecting some children. Parents were told the research might help develop treatments or immunity, but many families later said they felt pressured, especially because admission to Willowbrook was difficult and some believed participation could help secure a spot. The ethics were disturbing. These were children. Many could not consent, and they were already among the most vulnerable people in America. In the 1970s, investigative reporting exposed the conditions inside Willowbrook to the public. The outrage helped change how America viewed institutional care and disability rights. Willowbrook became a symbol of what happens when vulnerable people are hidden away and forgotten. Do you think America has fully reckoned with how disabled children were treated in institutions? Comment below and follow for more buried truths from American history.